In a quiet little town, there was a high school just like any other. The hallways buzzed with chatter, lockers slammed shut between classes, and students hurried to their next lesson. Among them was a boy who kept mostly to himself. He wasn't the loudest or the most popular kid in class. He didn't play sports or join clubs. His name was Ethan, and he preferred staying out of the spotlight. Ethan wasn't invisible, though. People noticed him in passing, a fleeting face in the crowd, but no one really knew much about him. He never talked about his family, his hobbies, or even what he did after school. Most days he sat quietly in class, listening more than speaking. That changed one day during history class when everything took an unexpected turn. Mr. Grayson, the history teacher, had a reputation for being sharp-tongued. Some students found his sarcasm funny, while others thought it bordered on cruel. On this particular afternoon, Mr. Grayson was teaching about government agencies and how they shaped national security. At one point, he asked the class a question. "Can anyone tell me which agency handles crimes that cross state lines?" Silence filled the room. No one seemed eager to answer. Then, almost hesitantly, Ethan raised his hand. When Mr. Grayson nodded at him, Ethan spoke softly, but clearly. "My dad works for the FBI," he said. The moment those words left Ethan's mouth, the entire classroom froze. It wasn't something anyone expected to hear from him. Ethan rarely shared anything personal, so this revelation came as a shock. For a few seconds, everyone stared at him, unsure of what to say. But then Mr. Grayson broke the silence with a smirk. "Sure he does, kid." "Sure he does," Mr. Grayson said, his tone dripping with disbelief. A few students chuckled nervously, while others exchanged glances. Ethan felt his cheeks burn as laughter rippled through the room. He wanted to shrink into his seat and disappear. Why had he even opened his mouth? After class, Ethan walked home feeling embarrassed and angry. He couldn't believe Mr. Grayson had dismissed him so easily. What made it worse was that what he'd said wasn't a lie. His dad did work for the FBI. Ethan had grown up knowing very little about his father's job, only that it involved long hours and secretive phone calls. Sometimes men in suits visited their house and black cars parked outside their driveway. But Ethan never bragged about it because his parents always told him to keep quiet. They said it was safer that way. That evening, Ethan avoided telling his dad about what happened at school. Daniel Parker, Ethan's father, was a man of few words when it came to his work. To Ethan, he looked like any regular dad, someone who mowed the lawn on weekends and helped with homework. But deep down, Ethan knew his dad lived a life far removed from the ordinary. Still, he couldn't bring himself to share the story of Mr. Grayson's mockery. All he could think about was how stupid he must have sounded in front of his classmates. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Word spread quickly around school about Ethan's claim. Some kids teased him relentlessly, calling him Agent Junior and cracking jokes about secret missions. Others acted like they didn't care, but Ethan could tell they were whispering behind his back. Even teachers started treating him differently, unsure if they should take him seriously or not. Feeling cornered and humiliated, Ethan began skipping class whenever possible. During lunch breaks, he hid in empty hallways or sat alone under a tree outside, trying to avoid the stares and snickers. At home, he withdrew further into himself, spending hours locked in his room playing video games or scrolling through his phone. His parents noticed the change, but assumed it was just teenage moodiness. They had no idea how deeply their son was struggling. What Ethan didn't realize was that his simple statement, that his dad worked for the FBI, would soon set off a chain of events neither he nor anyone else could have predicted. Little did he know, the truth would come crashing down on all of them in ways none of them were prepared for. Ethan's dad wasn't the kind of man who talked much about his work. To most people, he seemed like an ordinary guy, someone who drank coffee every morning, read the newspaper at the kitchen table, and occasionally helped Ethan with math homework when numbers got tricky. But there was always something mysterious about him, something Ethan couldn't quite put into words. Growing up, Ethan had learned to accept that his dad's job was different from other parents. There were nights when his dad didn't come, home until late, sometimes not at all. His phone would ring at odd hours and he'd step outside to take the call, speaking in hushed tones that Ethan couldn't overhear. Black cars with tinted windows would pull into their driveway unannounced, and men in suits would knock on the door, exchanging brief greetings before disappearing inside with his dad. His mom tried her best to explain it to him in simple terms. "Your dad works hard to keep people safe," she'd say, whenever Ethan asked why his dad was always so busy. "It's important work, but it means we have to be careful about what we share with others." "Why?" Ethan had once asked, wide-eyed and curious. "Because some things are better left unsaid," his mom replied gently. "Not everyone needs to know what your dad does. It's safer that way, for us and for him." As a kid, Ethan hadn't thought much about it. He accepted his mom's explanation without question, content to imagine his dad as some sort of superhero fighting invisible villains. But as he grew older, reality started creeping in. The black cars and secretive phone calls weren't part of a glamorous adventure. They were signs of a life far removed from normalcy. And while Ethan loved his dad deeply, he couldn't help feeling unsure about what exactly that life entailed. Despite the secrecy, Ethan picked up bits and pieces over the years. Once during a family dinner, his dad mentioned something about tracking down leads and working with evidence. Another time, Ethan overheard his parents talking quietly about a case that involved crossing state lines. Slowly, he pieced together that his dad worked for the FBI, a fact confirmed by snippets of conversation and the occasional slip of information from his mom. But even knowing this, Ethan rarely thought about it. His dad didn't act like someone straight out of a spy movie. He mowed the lawn on weekends, grilled burgers in the backyard, and cheered loudly at Ethan's middle school basketball games. Outside of the occasional late-night absences or strange visitors, he seemed perfectly ordinary. That ordinariness made it easy for Ethan to forget how extraordinary his dad's job really was. Until now. Sitting in history class that day, listening to Mr. Grayson lecture about government agencies, Ethan felt a sudden urge to speak up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity. He wasn't sure. But when the teacher asked if anyone knew which agency handled crimes that crossed state lines, Ethan's hand shot up almost instinctively. "My dad works for the FBI," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The moment the words left his mouth, Ethan regretted them. The classroom fell silent and all eyes turned to him. Some students looked impressed, others exchanged skeptical glances. But it was Mr. Grayson's reaction that stung the most. "Sure he does, kid. Sure he does," the teacher said with a smirk, his tone dripping with sarcasm. A few students chuckled nervously while others openly laughed. Ethan felt his face flush red as embarrassment washed over him. Why had he said anything? Why hadn't he kept quiet like usual? Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his room, replaying the scene in his mind. He hated how easily Mr. Grayson had dismissed him, how quickly the laughter had spread through the classroom. Part of him wanted to march back to school the next day and demand an apology. But another part, the bigger part, just wanted to disappear. What made it worse was that Ethan knew he was telling the truth. His dad did work for the FBI. Yet no one believed him, not even his teacher, whose job was supposed to be about teaching facts and encouraging learning. Instead, Mr. Grayson had mocked him in front of everyone, turning what should have been a proud moment into something humiliating. Ethan glanced at the framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of him and his dad taken last summer at a local park. They were both smiling, arms slung casually around each other's shoulders. Looking at it now, Ethan felt a pang of guilt. His dad had always taught him to stand up for himself, to speak the truth, even when it was hard. But instead of following that advice, Ethan had let Mr. Grayson's mockery silence him. He wondered what his dad would think if he told him what happened. Would he be disappointed, or would he understand? Ethan shook his head, pushing the thought aside. There was no way he could bring himself to admit what he'd done, not yet anyway. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself paying closer attention to his dad's habits. He noticed the small details he'd overlooked before. The way his dad's phone vibrated constantly, the briefcases he carried home filled with papers, the tired look in his eyes after long nights away. Each observation reminded Ethan that his dad's job wasn't just a distant concept. It was real, demanding, and often dangerous. One night, while helping his dad carry groceries inside, Ethan mustered the courage to ask, "Dad, is your job scary?" His dad paused, setting down a bag of apples on the counter. For a moment, he looked surprised by the question. Then he smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes, yeah, but it's also rewarding. Knowing I'm helping protect people, that makes it worth it." Ethan nodded slowly, chewing on his lip. "Do you ever wish you had a normal job? One where you don't have?" The teasing didn't stop after that first day. If anything, it got worse. By lunchtime, the whole school seemed to know about Ethan's claim. The story spread like wildfire, moving from classroom to classroom, whispered in hallways and shouted across cafeteria tables. Some kids thought it was hilarious, while others just rolled their eyes, assuming Ethan was making it all up. Either way, he became the center of attention, and not in a good way. "Hey, Agent Junior," someone would call out as he walked down the hallway. "When's your dad gonna arrest us for talking too loud?" Another kid might chime in with, "Yeah, or maybe he can solve the mystery of where my homework went." Each comment felt like a punch to Ethan's gut, but he tried to ignore them. He kept his head down, clutching his books tighter and hurrying to his next class. At first, Ethan hoped the jokes would die down after a few days. But they didn't. Instead, they grew louder and more frequent. Even kids who weren't normally mean joined in, feeding off the energy of the crowd. It wasn't long before Ethan stopped raising his hand in class altogether. He avoided speaking unless absolutely necessary, terrified of drawing any more attention to himself. His teachers noticed the change too, though none of them knew exactly what to do about it. Mrs. Carter, his math teacher, asked him once if everything was okay. Ethan just shrugged and muttered something about being tired. She let it go, but her concerned look lingered as he turned away. Deep down, Ethan wished someone, anyone, would step in and make it stop. But no one did. Even outside of school, Ethan couldn't escape the whispers. One afternoon, as he waited for the bus, a group of older students stood nearby, laughing and pointing at him. "Isn't that the FBI kid?" one of them said loudly enough for Ethan to hear. "What's he gonna do, call his dad on us?" They erupted into laughter, leaving Ethan feeling smaller than ever. He climbed onto the bus without looking back, sinking into a seat near the window and staring blankly at the world passing by. Things were no better at home. Ethan's parents could tell something was wrong. He barely spoke during dinner, spent most of his time locked in his room, and snapped whenever they asked how his day had been. His mom pressed him gently one evening, saying, "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay at school?" Ethan hesitated, wanting to spill everything. The teasing, the embarrassment, the way Mr. Grayson had mocked him. But the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain that he'd become a joke to everyone? That even though he was telling the truth, no one believed him? Instead, he shook his head and mumbled, "It's nothing." His dad raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. "All right," he said slowly, "but you know you can talk to us anytime, right?" Ethan nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve, but inside, he felt trapped. He wanted to scream, to shout that his dad really was in the FBI, that he wasn't lying, that he deserved to be taken seriously. But what good would it do? Would anyone actually believe him? As the weeks dragged on, Ethan began skipping classes whenever he could. He'd wander around the empty halls or hide in the library, hoping to avoid the constant ridicule. Sometimes he'd sit alone under the bleachers during gym class, pulling his hoodie over his head and wishing he could disappear completely. One particularly tough day, Ethan found himself sitting on a bench outside during lunch. A group of boys nearby spotted him and started whispering. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Yo, secret agent, what's the plan today? Taking down bad guys in the cafeteria?" Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. For weeks, he'd done his best to stay calm, to brush off the comments and pretend they didn't hurt. But this time something inside him snapped. Without thinking, he stood up and shouted, "Leave me alone! My dad is in the FBI, okay? Stop, acting like I'm lying." The boys froze, caught off guard by Ethan's sudden outburst. For a moment there was silence. Then one of them smirked and said, "Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Agent Parker." Defeated, Ethan slumped back onto the bench, fighting back tears. He hated how powerless he felt, how everyone dismissed him so easily. All he wanted was to be left alone, to go back to being invisible, like he used to be. But now, thanks to one offhand comment in history class, he was stuck in a spotlight he never asked for. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed replaying the day's events in his mind. He thought about all the times he'd been laughed at, all the snide remarks and mocking looks. He thought about Mr. Grayson's sarcastic tone and the way his classmates had turned against him. And he thought about his dad, the man whose job had unknowingly caused all this chaos. For the first time, Ethan realized he needed answers. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Tomorrow, he decided, he would confront his parents. He would demand to know the truth about his dad's job, and whether anything he'd said in class was real. Because if it wasn't, well, Ethan didn't know what he'd do then. The breaking point came sooner than Ethan expected. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything piling up day after day until he couldn't take it anymore. The teasing, the whispers, the constant feeling of being watched and judged, it all became too heavy to carry. But what finally pushed him over? The edge happened during English class. It started innocently enough. The teacher handed back graded essays, and Ethan's wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. As she passed his desk, she gave him a quick nod and said, "Not bad, but you can do better." Ethan nodded silently, tucking the paper into his folder. He didn't care much about grades anymore. He just wanted the hour to pass without incident. But then, halfway through the lesson, another student leaned over and whispered loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe your FBI dad can write your next essay for you." Laughter erupted around them, low at first but growing louder as more kids joined in. Ethan felt his face flush red, embarrassment mixing with anger until he couldn't sit still any longer. He turned sharply toward the boy who'd spoken. "Shut up," he snapped, his voice tight with frustration. "You don't know anything about me or my family." The kid smirked, clearly enjoying the reaction. "Oh, come on, Agent Junior, don't get mad, just admit you're lying." That was it. Something inside Ethan snapped. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I'm not lying," he shouted, his voice shaking. "My dad is in the FBI. Why does everyone think I'm making it up?" The room fell silent. Even the teacher stopped talking mid-sentence, staring at Ethan in surprise. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mr. Grayson, who happened to be walking past the classroom door, poked his head in. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing. Between Ethan and the rest of the students, Ethan froze. Seeing Mr. Grayson only made things worse. This was the same man who had mocked him weeks ago, planting the seed of doubt that spread through the entire school. Now, standing there with everyone watching, Ethan felt exposed and humiliated all over again. Before anyone could say anything, Mr. Grayson smirked and added, "Well, maybe your FBI dad can arrest me for giving you a bad grade." The comment sent a fresh wave of laughter rippling through the room. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting back tears. He wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them all understand how unfair they were being. Instead, he grabbed his bag, shoved his books inside, and bolted out of the classroom. That night, Ethan couldn't hold it in any longer. Sitting at the dinner table, he stared down at his plate, pushing food around with his fork without eating. His mom noticed right away. "You've barely touched your food," she said gently. "Is something wrong?" Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. He wanted to tell her everything, the teasing, the jokes, the way Mr. Grayson had mocked him yet again. But the words stuck in his chest. Finally, he blurted out, "Why didn't you tell me Dad was in the FBI? Why didn't you let me know? People wouldn't believe me." His parents exchanged a glance, their expressions shifting from concern to understanding. His dad set down his fork and leaned forward, his tone serious. Ethan, we never told you because it's not safe to talk about. Your mom and I have always tried to protect you from the risks that come with my job. But what good is protecting me if no one believes me when I say the truth? Ethan shot back, his voice cracking. Everyone thinks I'm lying, even my own teacher. Do you know how that feels? His dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry you're going through this, son. I really am. But there's a reason we keep things quiet. My work, it's complicated. Sometimes it puts us in situations where people might not react well. That's why we've always been careful. Ethan shook his head, tears streaming down his face now. Careful? You call this careful? I've been humiliated every single day since I said something. People laugh at me, mock me, treat me like I'm some kind of joke. And you didn't even warn me. His mom reached across the table, placing a hand on his arm. We didn't mean for it to hurt you like this, she said softly. But maybe it's time you knew the truth. Your dad isn't just in the FBI. He's one of their top agents. He works on cases that are dangerous, classified, things most people will never understand. Ethan looked at his dad, searching for answers in his expression. So you're saying it's real? Everything I said in class? That's true? His dad nodded slowly. Yes, Ethan. It's true. But listen to me carefully. Being part of this world comes with sacrifices. There are reasons we don't talk about it, Ope. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of confidence knowing that his dad really was in the FBI. But that confidence was overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. What would happen now? Would people believe him if he told them the truth? And more importantly, what kind of trouble might come knocking because of it? He dragged himself to school, dreading another day of whispers and smirks. As he walked into the building, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. Kids were gathered in clusters, chatting and laughing like always. Teachers hurried down the hallways carrying stacks of papers. It all looked normal, until Ethan reached the auditorium. Every student in the school had been called to an assembly that afternoon. No one knew why, but rumors were already flying. Some thought it was about a canceled field trip. Others guessed someone had gotten expelled. Ethan took his usual seat near the back, keeping his head low and hoping to blend into the crowd. When the principal stepped onto the stage, the room quieted down. She cleared her throat and began speaking in her usual calm tone. Good afternoon, everyone. We've called this assembly to address something important. Please remain seated and pay attention. Before she could say anything else, two men in dark suits entered the auditorium through a side door. They moved quickly, their polished shoes clicking against the floor as they approached the stage. The sight of them sent a ripple of murmurs through the audience. Students leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look. Even the teachers exchanged curious glances. Ethan's heart sank. He recognized the type immediately, the same kind of men who occasionally visited his house when his dad was working late. His stomach churned as the two agents whispered something to the principal. She nodded solemnly before turning to face the crowd again. Mr. Grayson, she said, loudly, her voice echoing through the auditorium. Could you please step forward? For a moment there was complete silence. Then slowly Mr. Grayson rose from his seat near the front row. His face was pale, his expression unreadable as he made his way toward the stage. Every pair of eyes in the room followed him, wide with shock and confusion. Whispers erupted everywhere. What's going on? Is he in trouble? Why are those guys here? Ethan sat frozen, watching as the agents led Mr. Grayson away. There was no explanation given, no announcement beyond the principal asking everyone to return to their regular activities. But the damage was done. By the time the assembly ended, the entire school buzzed with wild speculation. Some students claimed Mr. Grayson was involved in some sort of financial scandal. Others thought he'd offended someone powerful or leaked confidential information. A few even joked that Ethan's FBI dad must have sent the agents after him. Ethan didn't laugh. Instead, he felt sick to his stomach. As soon as the bell rang, Ethan bolted out of the auditorium and headed straight for the library, where he could be alone. He couldn't shake the image of Mr. Grayson being escorted out of the building. Had his dad really been involved? Was this somehow connected to him? The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. Later that evening, Ethan confronted his parents again. Dinner had barely started when he blurted out, "Did you send those agents to my school today? Did you make them take Mr. Grayson away?" His dad paused, fork halfway to his mouth. After a long moment, he put it down and sighed. "Ethan, I can't talk about specific cases, you know that. But yes, my team was involved in what happened today." Ethan's heart pounded. "Why? What did Mr. Grayson do?" "He didn't do anything wrong," his dad replied carefully. "At least not intentionally. Sometimes innocent people get caught up in things they don't fully understand. Let's just say Mr. Grayson stumbled into something bigger than himself." "But why him?" Ethan pressed, his voice rising. "Why my teacher? Is it because of me? Because of what I said in class?" His dad hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Not directly, no, but your comment may have brought certain connections to light. Connections we weren't aware of before." Ethan slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by guilt. If it wasn't for him, none of this would have happened. Mr. Grayson wouldn't have been dragged into whatever mess his dad was dealing with. The realization hit him hard, making it hard to breathe. Seeing the distress on his son's face, Ethan's dad softened his tone. "Listen, Ethan, this isn't your fault. These kinds of situations are complicated and they don't always make sense. All you need to know is that we're doing our job to protect people, including you." But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd played a role in ruining someone's life. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed the events of the day over and over in his mind. For the first time, he understood the weight of his father's work and the unintended consequences it could bring. The days that followed were a blur for Ethan. The entire school was abuzz with talk about what had happened to Mr. Grayson. Some kids whispered theories in hushed tones during class, while others openly speculated in the cafeteria or hallways. No one knew exactly why the FBI agents had taken Mr. Grayson away, but everyone had an opinion, and Ethan found himself at the center of it all. At first, people treated him differently. Instead of mocking him, they stared at him with a mix of curiosity and unease. It was as if his connection to the mysterious events made him both fascinating and intimidating. In history class, where Mr. Grayson used to teach, a substitute filled in. The sub didn't say much about what had happened, only mentioning that Mr. Grayson was on leave for personal reasons. But the lack of details only fueled more rumors. Ethan hated the attention. He felt like he was walking on eggshells, unsure whether someone would approach him with questions or accusations. A few students tried to pry information out of him, asking things like, "Is your dad really behind this?" Or, "Do you know when Mr. Grayson is coming back?" Each question left him feeling cornered and defensive. One afternoon after gym class, a group of older students cornered him near the lockers. One of them smirked and said, "So, Agent Junior, did your dad finally get rid of our teacher? What's the deal with all those suits showing up?" Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. "I don't know anything," he snapped. "Leave me alone." The group laughed, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Oh, come on," another kid chimed in. "You must have some insider info. Spill it." Before Ethan could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey, back off." It was Jake, a quiet boy from Ethan's math class who rarely spoke up. Even though Jake wasn't particularly popular, his unexpected intervention startled the group enough to make them scatter. Jake turned to Ethan and shrugged. "Don't let them get to you," he said simply before walking away. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of gratitude. Maybe not everyone was against him after all. Meanwhile, Ethan's guilt over Mr. Grayson gnawed at him constantly. He couldn't stop thinking about how his innocent comment, just a few words in history class, had somehow triggered such a massive chain of events. Was his teacher okay? Had he lost his job because of this? Or worse, was he in real trouble? Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Ethan decided to confront his dad again. This time he waited until late at night, when the house was quiet and his mom had gone to bed. Sitting across from his dad in the dimly lit living room, Ethan asked the question that had been haunting him. "Dad, is Mr. Grayson going to be okay?" His dad sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a moment he looked older than Ethan had ever seen him. "He's fine," he said eventually. "He wasn't involved in anything illegal, so there's no reason for him to face charges. But we needed to investigate something related to his computer activity. Someone had hacked into his system months ago without him realizing it, and it linked to a network we've been monitoring." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing. "Did he do something wrong?" "No," his dad replied, firmly. "Mr. Grayson isn't guilty of anything. If anything, he's a victim too. His negligence put him in a risky situation, but it wasn't intentional. We just needed to ensure he wasn't compromised further." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process everything. "So he'll be able to come back to school?" "Eventually, yes," his dad said. "Once we clear everything up and make sure there are no lingering threats." Even though his dad's explanation eased some of Ethan's fears, the guilt still lingered. Knowing that Mr. Grayson hadn't done anything wrong didn't change the fact that Ethan felt responsible for dragging him into this mess. A week later, something surprising happened. Ethan received a letter addressed to him in the mail. At first he assumed it was junk, but when he opened it, he realized it was handwritten. The note was short and simple. "Dear Ethan, I want to apologize for doubting you and for mocking you in front of the class. I now understand that your father truly is in the FBI, and I regret not taking you seriously. Thank you for indirectly helping uncover the issue with my computer. I hope we can move past this awkward chapter. Sincerely, Mr. Grayson." Ethan read the letter twice, stunned. He hadn't expected an apology, especially not from Mr. Grayson. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as insincere, but deep down, he knew the words were genuine. After everything that had happened, Mr. Grayson was reaching out not to accuse or blame. By the time midterms rolled around, life at school had shifted in ways Ethan never imagined. The initial chaos surrounding Mr. Grayson's disappearance and his eventual return had faded into the background of daily routines. But for Ethan, the experience left a lasting mark. It wasn't just about surviving the teasing or dealing with guilt. It was about learning to navigate a world where truth and perception often clashed. At first, Ethan thought things would go back to normal once Mr. Grayson returned to teaching. He assumed the whispers would stop, the stares would fade, and he could slip back into being invisible. But that didn't happen. Instead, something unexpected occurred. People started treating him differently, not with mockery or disbelief, but with cautious respect. It began subtly. In English class, when the substitute teacher handed out an essay assignment, one of Ethan's classmates leaned over and asked, "Hey, you think your dad can proofread this before I turn it in?" The comment was half joking, but there was no malice behind it. For the first time in weeks, Ethan found himself laughing along instead of shrinking away. Then came other small gestures. A girl who sat next to him in math class struck up a conversation about her favorite TV show. Another student thanked him for helping solve a tricky problem during group work. Even Jake, the quiet boy who'd stood up for him in the locker room, started sitting with him at lunch occasionally. These interactions weren't dramatic or life-changing, but they added up. Slowly, Ethan realized he wasn't as isolated as he'd been before. Still, the shift wasn't easy. There were moments when old habits crept back in. One day, during gym class, someone cracked a joke about Agent Junior saving the school from cybercriminals. The laughter that followed made Ethan tense, expecting the worst. But then another voice chimed in. "Dude, lay off. That's not cool anymore." To Ethan's surprise, the teasing stopped almost immediately. That moment stuck with him. It wasn't just about defending himself. It was realizing that others were starting to see him differently too. People remembered how Ethan had unknowingly helped uncover a serious issue involving their teacher. Whether they fully understood the details or not, they recognized that he hadn't lied. And maybe, just maybe, that gave him a little credibility. Despite these changes, Ethan still wrestled with his own feelings. Guilt lingered like a shadow, especially whenever he passed Mr. Grayson in the hallway. Even though the teacher had apologized and seemed genuinely remorseful, Ethan couldn't shake the sense that he'd caused unnecessary pain. Every time Mr. Grayson greeted him politely in class, Ethan felt a pang of regret. One evening, while helping his dad clean out the garage, Ethan finally voiced what had been weighing on him. "Do you think Mr. Grayson hates me?" he asked quietly, sorting through a box of old tools. His dad paused, setting down a wrench and turning to look at him. "Why would you think that?" "Because of everything that happened," Ethan replied, avoiding his dad's gaze. "If I hadn't said anything in class, none of this would have happened. He wouldn't have gotten dragged into whatever mess you guys were dealing with." His dad sighed, leaning against the workbench. "Ethan, listen to me. What happened wasn't your fault. Yes, your comment brought attention to something we needed to investigate, but that doesn't mean you're responsible for the outcome. Mr. Grayson knows that too. From what I've heard, he's grateful for how things turned out, even if it was uncomfortable for him." "But why would he be grateful?" Ethan pressed, frustration creeping into his voice. "He got humiliated in front of everyone. His life got flipped upside down because of me." His dad placed a hand on his shoulder, his tone firm but kind. "Sometimes, hard truths are exactly what people need to hear, even if they don't realize it at the time. Mr. Grayson learned something important about staying vigilant online. And you learned that speaking up isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Both of you grew from this experience, even if it didn't feel like growth in the moment." Ethan nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He wanted to believe his dad was right, but forgiving himself wasn't easy. Still, he resolved to try, to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. As the weeks went by, Ethan noticed another change. His relationship with his dad deepened. Before all this, he'd rarely asked questions about his father's job, content to let it remain a mystery. Now, however, he found himself curious about the cases his dad worked on, the challenges he faced, and the sacrifices required to keep their family safe. One Saturday morning, while eating pancakes together, Ethan asked, "Dad, do you ever wish you had a normal job? Something less intense?" His dad chuckled, pouring syrup over his stack. "Sometimes, yeah. But then I remember why I do what I do. It's not just about catching bad guys. It's about protecting people, families, kids like you. If I can help make the world a safer place even in small ways, it's worth it." Ethan mulled over the answer, sipping his orange juice. "Do you ever get scared? Like, what if something happens to you?" The question hung in the air for a moment. His dad set down his fork and looked at him seriously. "Of course I do. But fear doesn't stop me from doing my job. And knowing you and your mom are waiting for me at home, that's what keeps me going." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long, he'd resented the secrecy surrounding his dad's work, seeing it only as a burden. Now, he began to understand the weight of responsibility his father carried, and the pride that came with it. By the end of the semester, Ethan emerged stronger and more confident than he'd ever been. He still preferred staying out of the spotlight, but he no longer shied away from standing up for himself or others. When a new student joined the school and became the target of bullying, Ethan surprised everyone by stepping in to defend them. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it made a difference. Even Mr. Grayson noticed the change. One afternoon, after class, he pulled Ethan aside. "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of how you've handled everything," he said sincerely. "Not many kids your age could go through what you did and come out stronger on the other side." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thanks," he mumbled, unsure of what else to say. Mr. Grayson smiled faintly. Earned some respect around here, kid, don't lose it. Walking home that day, Ethan reflected on how far he'd come. Life hadn't gone back to the way it was before, all those weeks of teasing and humiliation. But maybe that was okay. Maybe growing meant embracing the challenges, learning from them, and finding strength in the process. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt hopeful. Whatever came next, he knew he could face it, with courage, resilience, and the support of those who mattered most. Ethan's dad wasn't the kind of man who talked much about his work. To most people, he seemed like an ordinary guy, someone who drank coffee every morning, read the newspaper at the kitchen table, and occasionally helped Ethan with math homework when numbers got tricky. But there was always something mysterious about him, something Ethan couldn't quite put into words. Growing up, Ethan had learned to accept that his dad's job was different from other parents. There were nights when his dad didn't come home until late, sometimes not at all. His phone would ring at odd hours and he'd step outside to take the call, speaking in hushed tones that Ethan couldn't overhear. Black cars with tinted windows would pull into their driveway unannounced, and men in suits would knock on the door, exchanging brief greetings before disappearing inside with his dad. His mom tried her best to explain it to him in simple terms. "Your dad works hard to keep people safe," she'd say whenever Ethan asked why his dad was always so busy. "It's important work, but it means we have to be careful about what we share with others." "Why?" Ethan had once asked, wide-eyed and curious. "Because some things are better left unsaid," his mom replied gently. "Not everyone needs to know what your dad does. It's safer that way, for us and for him." As a kid, Ethan hadn't thought much about it. He accepted his mom's explanation without question, content to imagine his dad as some sort of superhero fighting invisible villains. But as he grew older, reality started creeping in. The black cars and secretive phone calls weren't part of a glamorous adventure. They were signs of a life far removed from normalcy. And while Ethan loved his dad deeply, he couldn't help feeling unsure about what exactly that life entailed. Despite the secrecy, Ethan picked up bits and pieces over the years. Once, during a family dinner, his dad mentioned something about tracking down leads and working with evidence. Another time, Ethan overheard his parents talking quietly about a case that involved crossing state lines. Slowly, he pieced together that his dad worked for the FBI, a fact confirmed by snippets of conversation and the occasional slip of information from his mom. But even knowing this, Ethan rarely thought about it. His dad didn't act like someone straight out of a spy movie. He mowed the lawn on weekends, grilled burgers in the backyard, and cheered loudly at Ethan's middle school basketball games. Outside of the occasional late-night absences or strange visitors, he seemed perfectly ordinary. That ordinariness made it easy for Ethan to forget how extraordinary his dad's job really was. Until now. Sitting in history class that day, listening to Mr. Grayson lecture about government agencies, Ethan felt a sudden urge to speak up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity. He wasn't sure, but when the teacher asked,